I guess he got tired of playing a comic book character that only said 3 words. On this episode of Moving Panels, we discuss Bloodshot. Welcome to Moving Panels, the podcast where we discuss movies and TV shows based on, inspired by, and adapted from the world of comic books. I'm your host, Laramie Wells, and joining me today is the creator and host of the 80s flick Flashback, Mr. Tim Williams.
Hello, everybody. Glad to be here. Thanks, Laramie.
Oh, well, thank you for joining me on this. I'm going to go ahead and put a confession out there. I don't like Vin Diesel.
Yeah, he's not one of my favorites. Yeah, so this is, he once again proves why he needs the Fast and Furious to keep his name in, somewhat good standing. Because I'm a fan of those movies, but for totally different reasons. But when he tries to be like his own standalone movie star, it does not turn out well. And this
I'm not even a fan of I have actually never seen a Fast and the Furious movie past the second one.
Oh, I'm so sorry to hear that.
Yeah.
No, the second one is a good. I mean, if I only saw the first two, I would have stopped on the second one as well. It really doesn't get good until the fourth, when they really kind of rebooted it. Like 4, 5, and 6 are probably, and 7 are probably 4, 5, and 6 are probably the best ones. 7 and 8 is about as bad as the second one in my opinion. But I've totally invested now, so I'm in for the long haul.
Part of me wants to get back into them because I do like over-the-top action movies, which is what they seem to have turned into.
Definitely, yeah. Not. I mean, the movies now are nothing like the first one, and the first one is it differentiates itself so much from what they are now. They're just crazy action movies, heist movies, those kind of things. So, and a lot of comedy. So it works out where it kind of balances a little bit better. So
yeah. Now, I will say, when it comes to Vin Diesel, there is one movie that I will always say proves that he can act. It's a movie most people don't know. It's called Find Me Guilty.
Yeah, didn't he direct that one or produce that one, I think?
I don't know. But he's good in that. Other than that, let him stick to doing the voices of characters. Because Iron Giant, great movie.
Oh, yeah, yeah.
And, of course, him as Groot, amazing.
Yeah, but when I hear Groot, I never think of Vin Diesel. Like, that doesn't, I think of Bradley Cooper when I hear Rocket Raccoon.
Yeah.
But don't get Vin Diesel. I know because he's altering his voice somewhat.
Yeah, well, especially for the baby Groot and the younger Groot. But I think if you really listen in that first movie, you kind of hear that growl that Vin Diesel has. All right, so we are talking about the infamous Bloodshot movie that really is only a year old.
Yeah, which is crazy.
Yeah, this movie is only a year old. It was released, I find this funny, it was released on March 13th, 2020. Now, as much as I like to keep this podcast timeless and not really talk about current events, I can't help but point out that this was, for many people, the day the Earth stopped.
Yeah, pretty much. At least in America, yeah. Yeah,
COVID-19, pretty much the day the world just came to a stop was Friday the 13th.
It was.
March 13th, 2020, which happened to be the same day this movie came out.
Yeah, he should have known they should have known when they chose Friday the 13th as the release date for this that it was not going to turn out too well.
Yeah, what was the point of that?
I don't know. I think they were trying to, because there were a couple of other movies coming out right after that. We're trying to get ahead of the summer blockbuster season, like that middle spring. Because I want to say, was Black Widow coming out a couple of months after that?
Yeah, so Black Widow was scheduled for a May release at the time. Yeah. And of course, Wonder Woman had June.
Right. So I think they were trying to get it a little bit before the early summer releases, and also I think they knew kind of what they had, and most of these type of movies come out in like February and March is kind of what they call the dumping ground of the studios, where movies they don't expect to compete during the summer blockbuster or the Christmas season, and it's definitely not a fall awards season kind of movie. So well,
you say that they don't expect it to compete and all that, but the whole point of this movie was for Valiant to kick off their own little cinematic universe.
But were they ready? Because I read something that said they actually had planned a extra scene that was going to set up the next variant movie, but they did not include it in the final cut. So if they were pretty confident in this movie being that good, I thought they would have kept that in as a setup for the second movie. But that's just my own theory.
I don't know. I think maybe by taking it out, you at least get the, if it doesn't work out, this works as a movie all by itself, and no one ever questions the what could have been.
Right.
You know, kind of like Aragon. I remember when Aragon came out.
Yeah.
And of course, it's a series of books, and the end of that first one, you're just going, "Oh, this story's not over," but that movie sucked.
Yeah, I fell asleep in that movie. I don't fall asleep in very many movies, but I did not make it through that one.
I didn't fall asleep during Bloodshot, but I did rewind it a couple of times because I went, "Wait, what?"
Yeah, I can see that. I can definitely see that. So, but I will admit, like you said, this was supposed to come out, or I guess it did. I want to say the theater stayed open maybe that first weekend, and then everything shut down after that. But I remember it going to like the VOD pretty soon afterwards. And I think like a month or two into quarantine, I just sucked it up and said, I just got to see some kind of movie. Even though I've heard this is not that great, I'm going to take a chance. And I actually watched it on VOD during the quarantine one afternoon. And I was like, you know what? After not being able to see a new movie for about a month and a half, it wasn't terrible, but it wasn't fantastic.
I agree.
But going back and watching it a second time, like, yeah, it's still not terrible. I mean, I've seen worse comic book adaptation movies, but it's definitely it had a lot more potential to be something good, but it just kind of kept getting in its own way, I think.
Yeah. Well, I think we're kind of starting with our final segment. We're already giving our decisions. So let's backtrack a little bit. So again, this like I said, it was released and all that. The intention, at least when they made the movie, was to perhaps start a Valiant cinematic universe. Yep. Valiant is what many people would argue the number 3 brand of comic. You got Marvel and DC, of course, they're up there as the top 2, and then Valiant, you know, not very well known, but probably the one that's held in there. Image came in the 90s around the same time Valiant did, and tried to do it too with Todd McFarlane and all that. And although some of his characters really shined, like Spawn, gotcha. Valiant's the one that they came in the 90s, early 90s, 92 I think was when all of their comics kind of kicked off. Then they actually got bought out by Acclaim, the video game company. And then when Acclaim went under, excuse me, I can't say the word under. When Acclaim went under, they, I think, were in limbo for a little while, and then they came back being called Valiant Entertainment, and came back in 2012. Now I know nothing about what they did in 2012 when they rebooted a lot. I know they rebooted Bloodshot in 2012, and he had a slightly different look, because obviously in 92 was when you had the hyper violent characters that were just loaded with weapons and muscles and all that, which makes sense when you have Vin Diesel play him. But in 2012, they rebooted it. Now, I will say this was not the first Valiant movie. In 2018, Valiant released a web series called Ninjak versus the Valiant Universe. Okay. It was a 6 or 8 part web series in which they featured almost all of the Valiant characters, including Bloodshot. Okay. Bloodshot is actually played in this series by Jason David Frank. Do you know who Jason David Frank is?
No.
He's
I
Tommy.
was going to guess, but no.
He's what? Tommy from the Power Rangers.
Oh, okay.
The green Power Ranger or the white Power Ranger, whichever one you want to go with. Yeah. So he actually plays Bloodshot. They put all of the episodes together, as a lot of web series do, and made it a quote-unquote movie. It's like an hour-and-a-half movie.
Okay.
And they actually released it to help promote this movie.
Okay.
I've never seen it. I'm very curious. I will probably watch it a little bit later. In fact, I will even tag it into the show notes for anybody who wants to watch it. Because, again, Valiant has put it on YouTube. It's available. I do want to point out, not only am I a comic book fan, I'm also a wrestling fan. John Hennigan, better known as John Morrison from the WWE, he actually plays Galad. I don't know if that's how you actually pronounce it. He's the Eternal Warrior, the immortal kind of character from Valiant, which is actually kind of already tying into the moving panels here. He's in the very first, or I think issue 0 of Bloodshot, and it's kind of the one that begins Bloodshot's story. So I just found that kind of fun, me as a wrestling fan.
Nice.
Yeah, not much to talk about other than that. All right, so let's go ahead and jump into it. Let's get into the characters, of course. We got Bloodshot himself. Really, and we'll kind of talk about this throughout, really, he's the only comic book character in this movie. I think there's a loose connection with another character, which we'll get into in a minute, but really, Bloodshot is the only character from the comic books. Bloodshot, or Ray Garrison, of course, we mentioned already, played by Vin Diesel. I will give Vin Diesel this, though. For a man who is, I think, 52.
Wow, okay.
Look, I wouldn't mind looking like him when I'm 52.
Yeah, me either. Yeah, he's, that's pretty impressive. I mean, he hasn't really aged much in the last 10 years for sure,
Yeah.
So.
I think, well, pretty much being bald his entire career has probably helped with that, so we don't see like a fading hairline or him going gray or anything. Not to have any facial hair, but yeah, no, he's held up. Now, the character Bloodshot first actually appeared in Ray. It's Rai. Ray number 0. This was back in the 90s. I don't know what the thing was with comic books. They love to have these issue 0s. But he was in Ray number 0. It was a small little kind of bit that would just help to promote the character, and this was back in 92. And of course that just led to the Bloodshot comic, and then it just picked up from there. What's interesting, I'm not extremely familiar with the comic, but I do know that in the comic, it is true he does think he is Ray Garrison, but he is actually a former mobster named Angelo Mortali.
Oh, interesting.
Yeah, so I don't know why they just completely abandoned that aspect.
Right. Because that would have been interesting. That would have been an interesting. I say that, but it would have cluttered the movie even more than it already is. So it is an interesting tidbit that.
Yeah, because the way they do it in the comics is he's a former mobster. He decides to he frames like one of the mob bosses, and then he kind of goes into, I think, like witness protection or whatnot. But as he's with the police or the FBI, whoever he's with, one of them ends up actually working for the mob, and so he gets kidnapped and then brought to Project Rising Spirit, which we'll get into that a little bit more, and then he's forced into this experiment, which turns him into Bloodshot.
Gotcha.
So, but that's kind of how that goes. What'd you think of just Bloodshot as a superhero?
At least from this movie, because I don't know anything about the comic, it's interesting. I mean, he's kind of put together by the nanites and all that kind of stuff, but I really didn't understand why he was selected. Like, what made him so special besides the one line about, he's determined, he loves his wife. That's why he'll do whatever. But I don't think they ever proved that like he was any kind of great soldier. Now, once again, hate to compare comic book characters and movie characters. You take Captain America, who proved that he was worthy to have powers beyond the normal. But I guess they chose not to really show that, because everything at the beginning, we find out later, was all just programmed in his mind. We don't really know if that's how he really was as a soldier, or if that's just what they, the little program they put into him. So it's an interesting premise that, the nanites kind of keep him from bleeding and dying and all the super strength or whatever. But I really didn't know enough about Ray, or whatever the mobster name you said as a person was before, to say this is why we chose him to have these abilities.
Yeah. I do think in the comic they do allude to the fact that even without the nanites and his super abilities, he's still, like an amazing fighter, assassin, killer type thing. Okay. I think it kind of follows into that same, he's compared a lot because obviously when, there are DC characters you can compare to Marvel characters. So obviously a lot of the Valiant characters are compared as well. He's kind of looked at as kind of being a hybrid of, Wolverine and Deadpool along with the Punisher.
Yeah, I can see that.
So using those characters. So, even with Deadpool, you're talking about Wade Wilson was an assassin even before he became Deadpool. And, he could have killed you even without superpowers. And so just getting the superpowers just made him that much more dangerous. And then, of course, you've got the Punisher aspect where he's just focused on revenge and he's going to get his target.
I can see that aspect there, definitely.
All right, so moving on. This was actually where at the beginning of the movie, I think you assume it's going to be a bigger character, but that is Martin Axe. And if you don't remember who Martin Axe is, he is the one who you think is the one who has killed Ray's wife.
Right.
Now, I will say, I did recognize the name, not so much the Martin part, but the Axe part. There is actually a character in Valiant Comics named Axe, and he is just a computer genius who is actually a villain to the Valiant characters, because so many of the Valiant characters, their powers or abilities come from technology, and Axe, he is power hungry for that technology. And so I kind of went, oh, okay, so that's what they're doing. And then when he becomes Bloodshot, he's going to want the nanites and all that. But then they ended that very quickly.
Right.
So I don't know if he's intended to be the Axe from the comics, or they just named him that for at least one other reference to the comics.
Yeah.
But I don't know. And again, there's not a lot to talk about here. The villain, of course, and look, you know it when you hit play on this podcast, we're spoiling this movie. The villain, of course, is Dr. Emil Harding, which is played by Guy Pearce, which you got to tell me, Tim, as a movie guy, when have you ever not seen Guy Pearce and said, he's the villain?
There's interesting you should ask that question, because the only movie that initially comes to mind is the first movie I ever saw him in, and that was Memento, which was Christopher Nolan's, first kind of major movie, which parallels this story a lot because, in Memento, he plays a character that is trying to find the person that killed his wife, and he's being manipulated because of his short-term memory. If you haven't ever seen Memento, go see it. I'm not going to spoil it for you, but
go see it, become obsessed with it, then learn how to watch it in chronological order. And
yeah. So he was the villain in Count of Monte Cristo, which was probably the next movie I remember seeing him in, which is one of my favorites. Of course, he was the bad guy in Iron Man 3, probably most recently. And then he's had some of those. Those are the main roles that I remember him the most. I know I've seen him in other stuff as well, but those are the ones that stand out to me. But he's going to be the bad guy as soon as you see him come on screen.
Yeah, and that was my exact thing. I was like, oh, okay, so he's the bad guy. And then it was just a matter of how it was going to unfold. Yeah. And then you got this whole... Go ahead.
I want to say you kind of knew that in the trailers. I didn't go back and watch the trailer for this, but I don't think that was hidden from us during the trailers. I think we kind of knew he was the big bad as well. So
see, and I honestly don't remember much of the trailers other than the nanites, like him getting hit in the face and the nanites pulling away and then coming back, and that's really all I remember from the trailer. But then we've got all these other characters who you would think are from the comic books.
Yeah, I would have assumed that, definitely.
But they are not. So there's really not much to talk about. We've got KT, who I really need explained to me how if she breathes through something in her clavicle, how that prevents her from being affected by gas.
Yeah, I didn't understand that either.
Because wouldn't it still enter her lungs? Like, isn't she still breathing through her lungs? Like,
yeah, I would think so.
Yeah.
Yeah, I don't know.
So I didn't quite understand that.
Yeah, a lot of the quote unquote science of this movie doesn't really make any sense. It's just a bunch of, I think this would be cool. Let's do this. It's, and I will say this too about the director. This is the director of this movie, and I don't have his name right in front of me. You might have it. This was his first ever feature film as a director.
Shocking.
But he's more known for visual effects. So he did a lot of the visual effects for Age of Ultron, and
which those aren't bad.
Yeah, so you can see why it's such a visually, heavy visual effects kind of movie. which is good and bad. But
yeah, but it's just like when Tom Savini decided he wanted to direct. Like, Tom Savini is great when it comes to effects, makeup, all of the George Romero, Night of the Living Dead. Well, not the original Night of the Living Dead, but Day of the Dead, Dawn of the Dead. He helped a lot of those. And then when he decided to direct, it was just like, no, stay on your end. You're good with what you do.
Right.
And I love Tom Savini, but yeah, you don't need to direct, buddy. Because it's the same thing. Because we also are introduced to Tibbs. I guess I should mention who these people are played by to at least give them their credit. So KT was played by Isa Gonzalez, who I was not familiar with. Tibbs is played by Alex Hernandez, who I was somewhat familiar with from other things. Okay. But yeah, even him, I get he's blind. And then they talk about how he's got the videos like on his chest plate, the cameras, I should say, on his chest plate that allow him to see. But then I'm going, yeah, but he's seeing a foot lower than his eyes are.
Yeah, why wouldn't they just, if they're cameras, why wouldn't they just create eyeballs, cameras that look like eyeballs and put them in his eye sockets? That would make more sense. So,
and then they do the thing later where he puts on the helmet where he's able to get like a 360 view from all those cameras, and I'm going, that's better than what he had.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. So let me go back to Gonzalez, who played KT. She is in, I remember the most from, she's in Fast and Furious Presents Hobbs and Shaw. So if you haven't seen that one, she's in that movie. So, and I think she was the voice for Alita in the Alita movie that came out.
Okay. Yeah. Not again, year. Haven't seen any of the Fast and the Furious movies past the second one. And I haven't seen the Alita movie either, but that's cool.
Yeah. So I did at least recognize her. So.
Yeah. Well, that's good. And again, I'm not saying she was bad. No. I actually thought her character was actually pretty good.
I agree.
So, but then we also got pretty much who ends up kind of being the villain that goes along with the main villain, the villain you have to fight, or whatever you want to say. And that was Dalton, played by Sam Hugan, who had robotic legs, although when he fights Bloodshot, he also uses like Dr. Octopus-like robotic arms.
Yep.
So
that was interesting.
Yeah, that got a little weird because it's actually Dr. Harding who has the bionic arm, but that only comes into play with the fact that he can control KT's breathing through it. And yeah.
Well, it also gives him some kind of extra strength with that arm because he does throw some people around with that one. But, once again, I hate to, and maybe because I've been rewatching the Marvel movies here recently. So he's got like the arm like Winter Soldier. So you're expecting him to use that a little bit more as a weapon, kind of in the fighting scenes. He really doesn't fight that much at all. And then I was going to say something about the bionic arms, like you said, like Dr. Octopus. And I thought about Vulture from Spider-Man Homecoming because I just watched that.
It looked like that too.
Yeah. So it's like, I feel like they just they were just throwing stuff on these characters. This would be cool if we did this. Would it be cool if we, they're kind of pulling different things they just think is going to look cool to add to these characters instead of giving us any reason why they're doing it. And I guess they just figured that, and maybe I don't know if they were looking for a younger audience. And I say that I'm not to, put down like teenagers or whatever, but like movies that are made for like preteens and teens, they're not going in thinking through plots probably as much as we are as adults. So they're giving them more visual stuff and keeping the pace fast, that they're caught up in the action more so than the story. So
no, I totally agree. And continuing that of things that had no rhyme or reason, I got to talk about who actually turned out to be my favorite character.
I think I know this one. Go for it.
And that was Wilfred Wiggins.
Yes,
played wonderfully by Lamorne Morris. Of course, as many people know from the New Girl television show. He's great. Going to that you were just saying about things that don't make sense. Why is he British?
This, and I was going to say, I said he's doing his best Don Cheadle impression from the Ocean's 11 movies. Yeah. Because in the Ocean's 11 movie, Don Cheadle has the British accent for like no reason. So I took it as like his homage to Don Cheadle. But yeah, I didn't get why he was British either. Yeah, but I do love Lamorne Harris. I think he's actually one of the reasons why I wanted to see the movie more so than Vin Diesel or anything else, just because I've enjoyed him as a character and everything else he's been in. So
Yeah, there's no rhyme or reason. There's no mention as to him being a great European hacker or anything like that. And again, the character's not from the comics. So it's not like the character was already established in the comics and was British. It was just he's not British. The actor's not British.
Right,
you see.
Exactly. I have a feeling he just came in and said, "Hey, would it be cool if I just did this with a British accent?" And they're probably like, "Oh yeah, man, go for it. Yeah, it'll be fun." Like I think he just threw that in just to do something different.
Yeah, but again, he is probably the best part. As little that he actually has, he really steals the shows when he's there. And I do think that if their plan was or is, if they even attempt to do a cinematic universe, I kind of feel like he is going to be the Nick Fury or Agent Phil Coulson that will kind of tie in all of the characters.
Yeah, I would be happy to see that happen. So, yeah.
All right, so let's get into what I could kind of piece together for in terms of moving panels. I will say the look of the character is somewhat different. Of course, Vin Diesel is bald. Bloodshot has been bald, but probably the more iconic look in the comics of him is to more have like a military style crew cut. Buzz cut. Yeah. But he has like lightning bolts shaved into the side of his head, which is something they actually mentioned in his origin that is part of the process for some reason. So I didn't get that. Here was my thing though. So in the comics, Bloodshot is white. And I mean, like, I don't mean white as in Caucasian. I mean, he is white. He is pale because of I guess the experiment and whatnot. He is just from head to toe white. Yeah. I got worried when they did the scene in the tunnel. Yeah. Oh, yeah. And the truck they find out is filled with flour. I'm going, oh my God, is this the way they're going to show him to look like the character? Is he's going to be covered in flour? Yeah. And of course they did and they didn't. Later they had him look a little bit more all white when he's fighting Dalton and kind of. I
was going to say at the end he kind of takes on that character look. I guess from the comics, even a few pictures that I saw of comics, I think that was where they were trying to make him look more like the comic character, more true to the comic look. So.
And that's also when although they do it in the tunnel in the flower fight, and they mention it kind of at the beginning, but Bloodshot also has a red circle on his chest. In the comic, it's more of that's the injection site. Which they do show in the movie. They have where once you find out that he comes back and he gets re-injected, they have that. And that was almost exact panel out of the first Bloodshot comic of that machine. Like they recreated that machine to look very similar to the machine. And of course they do put the circle, it's a white circle, but they do have the circle on his chest. And then of course later they talk about when the nanites get going, that he will glow from his chest because his heart is pumping all of it and it's kind of heating up. So they did do all of that. So they at least acknowledged the look and all from the comic, but that was about it.
Yeah, it doesn't seem like they were trying to be too faithful to the comics. And once again, it may be just one of those things where it's like we've got the rights, let's use the main character and then kind of build our own world outside of that. Because I guess knowing that it's not as popular with comic book fans as a Marvel or DC property, they felt they had more artistic license, so to say, or so to speak, to do that.
Yeah, maybe.
We're totally guessing here. Yeah. I mean, I don't have any evidence to back it up, but...
I mean, the only other connection with the comic books is in the comics, it is called Project Rising Spirit. And of course, in the movie, it is Rising Spirits Technologies. And so that's really it. But I have a problem with that. I have a problem with just taking a property, a character, and then just going, we're just going to use it however we want. I mean, that's not what comic book fans want. No. I'm not saying you have to do a comic book storyline in a movie, but you have to at least give us the character and everything around the character. You have to give us that, and then you can give us your own story.
Yeah. I mean, if they would have, I guess taken the origin story from the comics and kind of kept the origin story at least, faithful to the comic, then get your sequel, then you can, take some liberties at that point. But once again, because I didn't, when I first saw Bloodshot as a movie, I was like, oh, Vin Diesel's trying to make a sci-fi kind of action movie. And then I found out later it was based on a comic book. I wouldn't have known, unless I went and read the comic before seeing the movie, I wouldn't have known there was any difference. I would have thought this came straight out of a comic. But at the same time, it still didn't give me it doesn't play like a comic book movie. Does that make sense?
No, it reminded me of the G.I. Joe movies.
Yes, and I thought I had that same thought as well when I was watching it this time. It's which once again you just take characters names that people are familiar with from playing GI Joes, but you completely create a different story. So it's a risk that movie studios are willing to take. They're either going to be faithful to the comic or they're going to go their own direction, and sometimes it works and sometimes it doesn't, I guess.
All right, so that actually was what I was about to ask you. Name me one that works. Name a comic book movie that only used the quote-unquote idea of the character and didn't really hold true to the comics that worked.
Yeah, I'm coming up with a blank on that one, so maybe I spoke too soon.
No,
but
I'm with you on that.
I'll say this. Granted, G.I. Joe wasn't a comic movie. I enjoyed the first G.I. Joe movie, Rise of Cobra. I mean, it's not the greatest movie ever made, but when it came out, I thought it was. I enjoyed it, and I've watched it a few times since then. It doesn't hold up as well now as it did the first time. The second one is definitely forgettable and should never see the light of day, as far as I'm concerned. But if I had to choose between watching Bloodshot and G.I. Joe: Rise of Cobra, I would go back and watch G.I. Joe. Maybe because I'm more familiar with those characters.
Yeah, and that's where I go with. You've got a lot more of the characters. You've got all of the Joes and you've got all of the bad guys. They're at least holding somewhat true to here are your characters and here are the characters that you are familiar with. And then, yes, they amped it up by having the Joes wear these stupid suits that gave them almost superhuman abilities and all that. Yeah. But I think G.I. Joe does work slightly better because we were surrounded, at least in our G.I. Joe universe.
Right.
Whereas in this one, you've got Bloodshot, and that's it.
Mm-hmm. That's it. Yeah. Yeah.
So you've got the character. No anything more to it than there's the character.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
But let's get into that technology. We kind of mentioned this when we were talking about the characters earlier. Did the actual, even their sci-fi nature of it, did the actual ability of the nanites make any sense to you?
No.
Yeah.
It just seemed like a cool world to say, the nanites are working, or the nanites are losing their, whatever at the end where the saturation or something was off. And once again, and I just watched, literally before we started recording, I just finished the movie and I've already forgotten parts of it. I think about, when I hear nanites, I think about Iron Man and his Iron Man suit in Infinity War. Mm-hmm. So
yeah, but my thing, okay, so first let's talk about this.
Okay.
He puts his trust in the nanites way too quickly and easily, in my opinion. From the beginning, he finds out about them, and then he's immediately, okay, I'm going to go off on this mission, and I'm going to have. How does he know that the nanites can hack the computer system and find the information he needs to find and tell him what he needs to do, and then he goes full Matrix with it too. Like in the Matrix, where it's, I need to learn how to fly a helicopter, so they load up the helicopter program. Do the same thing in this movie. Yeah. If you're going to take a plane, do you even know how to fly a plane? Just give me a minute.
Right. Right. He has faith in that, but then when they talk to him, like, how are you talking to me right now? Dude, how have you done anything that you've done so far? And you wonder how can they talk to you when they're not standing in front of you?
I didn't even think about that. Yeah. Hey, how can I hear you? Because you got freaking robots for blood.
Right. Right.
But then here's my thing: if this is such high end technology and they're helping him with all of this, stuff and all that, how does the nanites not tell him, "Hey, you may want to stop punching this pillar because the entire building could collapse"?
Yeah, I had that thought too. I was like, yeah, punch a wall or find something that's not, that keeps the building upright.
Yeah.
So,
because a pillar in the middle of a room typically means it's there for a reason.
Exactly.
Yeah, let's not go punching it. And then my other thing is, then when you find out that it gets reset, like, how do they rebuild that pillar over and over again?
They must. And that there's so many plot holes in this movie, yeah.
Go ahead.
They have to, because is he that predictable? And maybe that's why they chose him. He's so predictable; they know exactly what he's going to do, so they can rehash the same thing over and over again. But I also have the question: is you've got these 3 other pretty much assassins that could,
that are on your side. Yeah, you don't have to wipe their memories.
Why the big charade of making him think these guys killed? Why? Because when they all get killed, they know why they're being killed, and they know why they're being killed by, Guy Pearce's character, whatever his name is again. Why didn't you just send them to go kill them all at one time? Why does he have to have Bloodshot relive this tragedy and then send him to go do it?
Yeah, and that's the other thing. Harding's whole MO of killing them off is, first off, you have to figure it out yourself. You have to figure it out. Oh, Axe and the other dude, who I can't even remember his name, Barris, I think it was. Axe and Barris were his partners who helped him create the Bloodshot or the nanites or whatnot, and now he's killing them off so that when he sells it, he can keep all the money for himself. But you have to figure that out. They don't make that really clear.
No.
And then, of course, you also find out that even Axe was like the 5th guy. Like, there was, you see the board.
Yeah. Right.
Yeah. But yeah, that part, and then KT, Dalton, and Tibbs, who were all on your side and continue to be on your side, except for KT, who eventually decides to turn and join Bloodshot.
Right.
But yeah, what do you have them for? What do they do?
Exactly. They're just there. They're just there to fight him at the end when he realizes that it's all fake. I mean, that's the only, for the lack of a better term, logical reason they're in the movie. They have no other motivation or no other, they have no other reason to be in the movie besides that. And that's what's so disappointing about it, because if you really think about it, they're there at the beginning maybe to show him there's a team, but even when he comes out and the Guy Pearce is telling him what they do and who everybody is, it's never really explained why we brought you back to life. Like, there's a purpose for why you're like this, and we're going to use you in this way. They don't even get that far. It's just like, here's who these guys are, and we brought you back to life. Now, go take a nap, and then when you wake up tonight, we're going to play this song to make you remember. It's just, yeah.
And that's the thing too. You don't actually know how he first became Bloodshot. Because again, what we thought was the reason was actually a programmed memory. Which brings me to this. When I was doing a little research, there is a theory that the ending real of him driving off, with KT into the sunset.
Right.
Like, is that real? Or is he
Another
still
program.
being kind of, manipulated in some way?
Yeah, that's a stretch. That's a big stretch.
Well,
so
here's where it comes from. Where it comes from is Wiggins, who we hear his voice. You assume he's talking just like Harding was talking to him earlier through the nanites. And Wiggins actually says the line, "It's a little too perfect, if you ask me."
Yeah.
Are you serious? True. Right into the sunset? Are we sure this ain't all? And then he gets cut off.
Yeah, I could see. Yeah, it's not quite as big of a stretch now, but once again, then then who is it? Then who's then controlling him at this point? And maybe if they had that deleted extra scene, post credit scene, maybe that would have tied that up a little bit better.
Yeah,
because like I said, all I know is it was supposed to introduce another variant character in the deleted scene. So, but then it got scrapped at the last minute. So
yeah, which I want to say was actually supposed to be Ninjak. I can't remember. I think I did look that up as to who it was supposed to be. Look, I will say this. I said it earlier. The effects in this movie are awesome. I did like the effects. I liked that even the fight scenes or the battles and whatnot, it didn't take the realm of what a lot of CGI heavy superhero movies do, and they make it happen so fast and quick that you can't even really see what's going on. I mean, this movie flat out slow mode things.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
And so I actually enjoyed a lot of the visual aspect of this and what they did with a lot of the visual effects and whatnot. But as a comic book movie, again, it just kind of fell short. It didn't really... To me, a comic book movie should do two things. One, it should reward fans of the character and the comic book by giving them a live action version of that character and comic.
I agree.
And two, it should have people who are not familiar with the character in the comic have an interest in the character and comic, to pull them in to say, okay, now I want to look up more information about this character. I want to know more about this character. I want to see this go farther. But at the end of this movie, I was like, okay, done.
Yeah. Yeah. Once again, it's pretty forgettable. And I can say, like, after watching it, I didn't want to go find the comic and read a comic to learn more about the character at all. And I don't know if that's because it's Vin Diesel being Vin Diesel, so there was nothing unique about the character that made me interested in him. You know what I'm saying?
Yeah.
Or if it just because the movie didn't do enough to, like you said, pique my interest enough to want to see where this character goes from here. Because even how the movie ends, it's like, okay, well, you defeated this guy, and so now we brought you back to life, and we're driving off. But there's really no who's the next person they've got to go after, or what's the next mission possibly going to be. So
yeah, because even with my theory of is the ending a simulation, maybe having something like digitized there at the end just to hint that there's something more. But there was nothing. It was... Yeah. I mean, yes, again, if you're listening to Wiggins, he gets cut off. And that's really it. But that wasn't enough. It wasn't enough of a hook to make me think, ooh, this isn't over yet. And I'm not saying that they had to set it up for a sequel. But they had to build something to hook the audience. Comic book fans and non-comic book fans that are watching it saying, I need to find out more.
Yeah, I agree.
Because that's what a comic book movie, a comic book hero, a comic book character, any of that's supposed to do. I mean, that's what comic book issues are. You should be able to read an issue, be satisfied with reading that issue, but the end of the issue or things that happen throughout that issue should then make you want to go and read another issue, maybe to find out background information or to read the next issue to see where the story goes from there. That's the whole point of comic books.
I agree.
All right, so we've kind of made this pretty clear, but let's go ahead and get into it. Our final decisions on the podcast, call it Bag It, Stack It, or Trade It. Same way you would treat it if it was a comic book. Tim, as the guest, you get to go first. So what you going to do? I have a feeling.
All right, so it's Bag It, Stack It, or...
Trade It.
Trade It. Yeah, I'm trading this one.
Of course.
Yeah. I mean, it's close to being the Stack It because... it's not a terrible movie. And it has, if you just want a good, or did I say good? If you want a entertaining action movie, that's just an action movie, then I would
G.I. Joe.
Yeah. It's like I'm trying to convince myself while I'm talking, but I'm like, yeah.
Or a Transformers movie.
Right.
Again, I would pick not good movies, but
yeah, any Michael Bay movie is well, not any Michael Bay movie. Most Michael Bay movies is better than this.
Mm-hmm.
But yeah, I mean, honestly, this is not a movie that I think I'm going to watch again, just unless, I'm at somebody's house and they decide to watch it and I don't have a car to leave or I'm stuck there for some reason. I'd sit through it again. But yeah, yeah.
No, I'm right there with you. This is definitely a trade it. I do not see it being a movie that I would revisit in any way, shape, or form. When I got the chance to watch it, and you talked about getting it on VOD, which I'm going to guess means you did pay for it.
I did.
Yeah.
Yep.
No, I did not. We got the free trial of Stars.
Yeah, that's how
and
I rewatched
I found out it was on Stars, and I was like, okay, well, while we've got this free trial, I'm going to give it a watch. And I would not pay to see this again.
No.
Will I buy it? Probably. But that's just the nature of me wanting to own every movie that's, created from a comic book. It's the whole reason I got this podcast and all. But would I watch it again? Not unless someone wants to talk about it on the podcast for any other reason.
Yeah, I would say like if someone had the Blu-ray, or if I found the Blu-ray for like $5 in like a bargain bin or something, if it had some decent special features like deleted scenes, some good special features where maybe I'd get better understanding of the reasoning why, or scenes that were cut, I would watch it again for that reason. Like
I agree with that. Yes,
I'd be willing to buy it for the special features to kind of get a little bit more a backstory or background about it. But other than that, yep, I'm trading it for G.I. Joe at this point.
Yeah, again, I would trade it, like you talked about Michael Bay, I would trade it for G.I. Joe, I would trade it for any Transformers movie, I would trade it for the Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles movies. Yeah. Oh, dear Lord.
That's a stretch. The Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtle movies, yeah, that one's a rough one.
They're more fun than this one was.
Yeah. Yeah. They are more fun. I can give you that. And maybe that's the other word. This was not a fun movie.
No.
I mean, until Lamorne Morris comes in as like the real comic relief. It's a very heavy, and it's a heavy movie. And that's, once again, I hate to do comparisons, but you look at The Rock, you look at Vin Diesel. They're both kind of bigger guys or action movie guys that typically play the same character in every movie. But at least The Rock has some humor to him and doesn't take himself too seriously. And I think Vin Diesel just wants to be this. He wants to show how tough he is in whatever movie he's in, especially here recently.
But he's the pacifier.
Yeah. Well, I said recent movies.
Yeah.
Like early in his career, I mean, Vin Diesel was okay. Yeah, when he made The Pacifier, that's a decent family movie to watch. But yeah, once he got into the Fast and Furious and that kind of put him on the map. Then he did the XXX movies, which were horrible.
Yeah, but they're more fun than this.
They are. Yeah.
Again, I'm not saying they're good.
Yeah.
But I would watch XXX before I rewatched Bloodshot.
Honestly, I don't think I've ever made it through the first XXX movie.
Oh, wow.
I've seen the beginning probably 4 times and never made it to the end.
I think I've seen each of them once, but
yeah.
I honestly, if you were to say, what would you rather watch? Would you rather rewatch Bloodshot or would you rather rewatch XXX? I'd pick XXX.
Yeah. If I could make it through it, maybe I did make it through it once, but it's so forgettable. So
I agree with that.
Yeah.
Again, I'm not saying either one of them are good. Or any of the XXX movies are good, but I would definitely pick XXX over this. I don't know if it's just I haven't seen XXX movie in a long time because again I think I've only seen it once.
Right.
But right now, since I just watched Bloodshot, I'm definitely choosing. I'm not turning it on again.
I'm there with you.
All right, so I think that pretty much wraps it up for us. We both definitely would just pass on this movie. I honestly would say of all of the movies I have done so far for this podcast, this is the bottom of the list for me. I'm not saying there's not worst out there, but
yeah, because there's a few you haven't gotten to yet.
Yeah, so there's a few I haven't gotten. I mean, there's several I haven't gotten to, but as of right now.
Yeah, but you could probably say this is the first one that it's a first watch for you that's on the bottom of the list because probably the other bad ones you've seen already and know they're bad, right?
Yeah, but even so, there's a such thing as a good bad movie.
Of course.
So, like, I've done Captain America 1990 on the podcast before.
Yeah.
To me, that's a good bad movie. Like, you enjoy watching it for how bad it is.
Right.
Then you've got movies that are bad, that they are bad movies, and you would never want to watch them again, and that's where Bloodshot falls. And I can't think of another movie I've done on this podcast yet that falls under that realm.
No, not that I can remember.
I mean, the X-Men movies are bad, but I'd rewatch them.
Yeah, I've rewatched all well, I haven't rewatched Dark Phoenix, and I probably won't, but and Apocalypse, all the other ones, yes, but those two, no.
And again, I even Daredevil and Hulk and all of those that came out before the MCU, I'd rewatch those, even though they're not great. Yep. But no.
Right.
All right. Well, let's go ahead and move on. So why don't you give everybody a little bit of information about your 80s flick flashback? I just enjoy saying it.
Yeah, I like the way you say it too. The 80s flick flashback. So we I'm a kid of the 80s. I grew up as a youngster in the 1980s, and I have a great affection and affinity for movies made in the 80s, blockbusters as well as lesser known movies that I've discovered on cable TV or the now defunct video rental stores. So every other week, a friend of mine, like Laramie and some other guest hosts as well, we will rewatch or watch for the first time an 80s movie and talk about it, our first memories of it, if we saw it as a kid or saw it in our younger days. And then we also discuss the behind the scenes, how it came to be, casting, all that kind of fun stuff. And we just have a good time talking about a fun 80s movie. So check us out. We're on all of the major podcasting platforms you find this great podcast on as well. So check us out.
It is a fun listen. Lots of trivia and behind the scenes information. So if you are not just a comic book fan, but just a movie buff like I am, it's a great listen.
I agree.
All right. Well, thank you, Tim, for joining us, and thank everybody for listening. Please give us that 5-star rating and review on Apple Podcasts and help keep this show going. But for now, for Moving Panels, I'm Laramie Wells, and I'll see you on the other side of the page.
Family. That's my best Vin Diesel impression. Family. I am Groot.